Yeah, like our mutual friend Gracie, she was indoctrinated in the university.
Hmm.
She talked about, and she studied feminism,
Yeah.
and she went into a tremendous amount of debt. And she talked about it being a lens, the way she shifted, and she began to see everything through the lens of feminism. That was
Yeah.
what she would categorize as indoctrinated into. So you were raised in a conservative home, it sounds like a Christian
Yeah.
home, but then you got smarter than everybody around you, and then you
Oh,
did you
yes.
did you put this lens on, and like what was going on in your mind, and would you is that a fair characterization that you began to look?
That's a perfect characterization. Yeah, Gracie always has a good way of putting things. What a wonderful gal. So she went through the university route of going through full blown gender and women's studies and being, heavily into that. Here's all the books that I've read. I know more than you, the patriarchy, and so on. Now, I got into a little bit of feminism, but I dabbled. I was more of I'm moving across the country. I'm a quote gypsy. I'm just taking in all these different ideas. And for me, because spirituality was such a big part of it, a lot of my indoctrination happened in various sort of spiritual retreats. And I did all of my Reiki training. If you don't know what Reiki is, it would be a type of quote energy healing, the laying. They even will call it the laying of hands, just like Jesus did, which is complete blasphemy, but that's a different discussion. It's a lens in which you look at the world. You start to see things in a warped way, but you think because you've learned it, you've read all these books or you've listened to all these podcasts, that somehow you're more enlightened. It's essentially a sense of feeling more enlightened. Now, I grew up, yes, conservative Christian, and I was on fire for God in high school, on fire for God. I loved Jesus, and I wanted to please him, and I wanted to do good work for him. And then there was a few things that happened, and I mentioned it a bit in one of my recent videos, kind of a trifecta. So I went through an experience with a pastor. My parents were fantastic. I had a really good childhood. I have to just give them huge kudos, wonderful people. But when you get into this ideology, suddenly you start to question one thing at a time, and all of the goodness in your life becomes rigid, or you see it as small-minded or bigoted, or they're just not as smart, they're not as wise, right? And that's where the university part really comes in. There's an arrogance that comes with it. Absolutely. The irony of it being it's supposedly this compassionate worldview, but it almost always comes with an immense amount of ego. And a lot of people will even talk about, especially in the spiritual world, oh, you have to deny your ego, get rid of your ego, while your ego is just being inflated every single day because, oh, you're so enlightened and this person just doesn't understand. They just didn't go to this college class. They just didn't go to this spiritual retreat. So I started to just drift from my family, and started to look at my parents as people I had to teach, like they didn't know anything, which is ridiculous. I mean, the stuff that my parents went through and the stuff that a lot of people, my elders, which I've been taught to kind of respect again, it was extremely valuable. And my father passed away in 2019, and I miss him desperately. I wish that I had him, because all those years I missed his grounding, common sense nature, because I was busy living in la la land with all of these ideas that I thought were superior, and all they were doing was dragging me into darkness. So yeah, I started off conservative, started off Christian, and then went through the trifecta of a negative spiritual experience with a pastor who was legitimately difficult and made me question myself at a very young developmental age. So between about 16 and 17, right when you're, questioning who you are, it's adolescence. I mean, who's not struggling through adolescence, right? So I went through some trouble there, and then went through an abusive and very misleading relationship with, again, someone who I saw as better than my upbringing. He was relaxed. He was so, worldly, and he had traveled and very artsy, very creative. I'm a musician as well, so that plays into this too. So I kind of just started listening to him, and he was very persuasive, and I'm a little more, I'm not as assertive. I think I'm more of I've learned how to be over the years, but I'm more meek by nature. And so I was easily persuaded by fancy words and big ideas and philosophical discussions. And he was very hurt by his past. So his lens, if you want to call it that, was very negative towards tradition and family and a lot of things, any Western ideas at all. So whether it's capitalism, all of that stuff, he was very critical of a lot of things, critical of institutions, critical of religion, anything that I had as a foundation in my life, he was critical of. And so I just slowly started to believe that. And I became more antagonistic with my family and more antagonistic, left the faith, kind of left everything that made me who I am. And then from there, I dealt with a lot of health issues. And that's what brought me into both the idea of really wanting to be compassionate to those who are suffering, because legitimately, people who have disabilities are generally thrown to the back of the list. And that's in all sides for politics. They are not a hot topic for getting votes. They just don't make the cut. So I didn't like seeing that people were suffering and poor. That bothered me a lot, especially knowing what it was like to not be able to work when you're ill. So it came from a place of compassion, but with that also came my weaving into the natural health world, which I'm still, as I like to say, a little granola. I'm all about natural health and supplements and nature and all that good stuff. I eat really clean and I don't use a lot of chemicals. But that just was a door into the new age of spiritual healing. And so that led me into everything from yoga to Reiki to crystals. Oh, did I have crystals? And I would lay them on me and lay them on my chakras and do healing. And I did tons of shamanism. I was big into the paranormal and so excited if I had any, ghost paranormal experiences, and believed that my good intentions could protect me from anything. Pretty much, they made me invincible. So yeah, I walked away from my past big time. A lot of what I was doing made my parents very uncomfortable. My mom didn't want to lose me or make me mad and have me be farther away than I already was. So she would, kind of help me through it, but she never felt good about it, like funding different workshops and training. But yeah, I really lost my way. And thankfully, my parents, my family, and of course, my God, they stayed true. They stayed with a sense of truth, right? Instead of just this, what is truth? There is no truth. They were very grounded. So thankfully I had something to return to and some memories that would hold me back and anchor me from being completely off the wall. Because without that, I don't know where I'd be right now.
One of the things that I've just learned in the time that I've been doing this podcast is, because I talk to a wide variety of people that have left the critical social justice movement or wokeism and this ideology on different levels, whether it's feminism, veganism, the Black Lives Matter, everyone's a racist, or queer theory. All these things are similar in the species of it. And so, but one of the things that I found is it seems like a lot of people, as you characterize yourself, you said earlier that you were a young girl, you were a teenager, and you loved Jesus and you loved God, and then something happened in the church, and then there was like an entranceway to leave Christianity in a way and pursue other things. And so I find that a lot of the people that get sucked into it, because some people aren't affected by this virus at all. They're just like, oh, that's ridiculous. I don't buy it. I don't, doesn't affect me at all. But other people get so sucked into this dialectical approach of seeing the world through the oppressor and oppressed. And a lot of the people that are getting sucked into it are people like yourself that had religious trauma, or they had a faith, but then something pivoted where they looked at Christianity or any religion as oppressive, and they needed to be liberated from that. And so can you talk a little bit about that? Because I there's just something in this virus that attracts people that are high in the empathy level, people that had faith. And there's a lot of talk going around about religious trauma. And I think you can speak pretty authoritatively about that. And so I'd like to dig into that a little bit more from your perspective and your thoughts. We haven't talked about this at all, but I think what I'm saying is resonating with you.
100%. Yeah. Now, I mean, I talk about this in my testimony on the spiritual side, and how a lot of people who do dive into this sort of spiritual but not religious smorgasbord, a lot of them have some negative association with the church. So whether that's, unfortunately, sexual abuse type issues, or whether it's something like mine, which was a spiritual abuse, which is something, that's a deeper topic I won't get into, but essentially just somebody kind of messing with your head and gaslighting you and making you think you're not doing enough and all of that. These sorts of things, they really do, they change some people's perspective of the entire truth of God or the Bible. And it's often people that aren't maybe as rooted in the word and in understanding basically the historical accuracy or understanding the context of when the Bible has been used by man for terrible things. And a lot of people, aside from the spiritual side, when you look into more of, as you said, you talk to people, whether it comes to queer theory, critical race theory, gender theory, all of these sorts of things, they see the church as patriarchal, oppressive, and historically a symbol in their mind of, an oppressive force, basically. And I mean, there is some truth to the fact that the institution, the man-made institution of various organizations and churches, obviously has been used over history for some pretty horrible things. So if you just look in, for example, in Canada, I've always also had a heart for our First Nations or our Indigenous people, and there's a bad history with things called residential schools and elements of the church. And you could certainly argue that a lot of what happened was sinful and bad and evil and dark, and people then see those actions by human beings, usually the government, just another little hint, nudge, nudge. It's almost always politicians that did these horrible things or led these movements. You can almost always, you see it's man, but most people, they look at it as God, and they just say, well, no God would allow this. This can't be true because bad people did it. It's always an association of the sinfulness of man, and then they paint the entire religion with it. The big one right now I see in 2023 is sort of the concept of what is the biblical view of marriage. That really, really, really bothers people who are more left leaning, and I was one of them. I was mad at God about, the idea of racial justice stuff, because I, like many in the social justice movement, see Christianity as a white man's religion, which is kind of insane because, you look at the actual history of the Bible, where it took place, the main characters involved. Jesus is not there for one race. He is here for everybody. And it was about all nations under God speak in the same language. It has nothing to do with your skin color or your melanin. Period. It's really a fallacy. There's been a lot of academic work and secular work that focuses on, just hammering on the faith, but it has nothing to do with Christ. Christ didn't condone any of those things, and Jesus weeps at every single injustice, just like the people here that are trying to find this social justice on earth. The difference is you can't really have social justice. I mean, there is a justice system. We are called as Christians to stand for true justice, but social justice is a different ballgame. There's no concept of forgiveness and grace and repentance and any of those things. It's a completely different world. It's man-made, and you're chasing your tails and usually causing more harm than you mean to. And I think for getting back to kind of the queer theory idea, go ahead.
You bursted my bubble that Jesus wasn't a blonde-haired, blue-eyed,
I know,
Anglo-Saxon Protestant. I mean,
we joke, my husband and I, because we've seen sometimes you see these candles or these images of this like very, very white, blue-eyed Jesus. We call him Euro Jesus, which of course he wasn't, right? So yeah, that's the other thing. People assume that Christians are just so stupid and that we all believe this. They think we're this monolith of belief systems and that we're naive and we have no concept, that there's no intellectualism behind it, which is nonsense. I believe that. Like, I was that superior. Oh, my Christian parents. Oh, they're there, you sweet people with your belief in your sky daddy, sky fairy. Like, I've heard all these terms online thrown around. There's a lot of arrogance around it. And I mean, you're not going to convince everybody, but a lot of the belief is that people don't think about it. When on au contraire, people talk very deeply about this. And there's a lot of discussion about this. People spend time doing Bible study. People are learning Hebrew just so they can learn, about the original language of the Bible, or Greek. There's a lot of incredible minds, apologists doing this kind of work. And so there's a lot more to it than people, maybe realize. That even a lot of Christians, modern day Christians, have no idea of how much rational evidence there is for their faith. But when it comes to some of these modern day issues, when you look through this social justice lens, it paints Christianity and paints anybody involved with it as an oppressor. And in fact, Jesus came to free the oppressed. And it wasn't in the way of social justice. It wasn't, I mean, there's people saying now that Jesus was trans. I mean, they're trying so desperately to fit him into our current worldly bubble that they don't, and they'll use verses out of context. And it's really quite a mess. People that don't believe in God or the Bible, but suddenly that one verse that they think, without any studying at all, promotes their worldview, they're happy to share it. So when it comes to something like gay marriage, for example, that's a big, no, you cannot say anything about it, because in our current worldview, we see, love is love, whatever, right? These are the ideologies that we have. And if somebody doesn't agree with that, even if they can love a person, I tried to gotcha the pastor that helped bring me out of all this. I tried to gotcha him by asking him about homosexuality, and he gotcha'd me back by showing that you can disagree with something and love them and show grace and welcome them with open arms into the church. These are the sorts of issues that I think people see disagreement as bigotry. They see everything as oppressive. They see everything as just stamping all over people's rights. It's simply not true. It's a fallacy. And I'm not saying that there's not Christians out there that are trying to use their faith for dark purposes. Of course there are. There's bad people in every group. Human beings can really suck. I don't know what else to say. People do terrible things. But it has nothing to do with Jesus at all. He was sinless. He was perfect. And he is here to redeem everybody. And the more that I look at all of this stuff, the more I realize that he truly is the answer. But if you just want to look at it from even a secular sense, logically, just on an intellectual level, you can't, the claims about the church that pulled me away are mostly fallacies, or they're close to the truth, as so many things are. 90% might be not true, but then that 10% pulls you in. There's always some element of truth. And, sort of, it tastes like butter, but it's actually margarine, that kind of concept, right? It's sort of close. And so it looks good enough, and that sucks people in. So